You ever dig a moat around your driveway? With an actual drawbridge? No? Then you've probably never lived across the street from Karen Whitlock. Let me back up. Our neighborhood, Sunset Hills, was the kind of place that made realtors salivate and first-time buyers dream. Tree-lined streets, block parties with deviled eggs and cornhole, kids riding scooters while their golden retrievers chased after them. The American dream with just the right amount of artisanal mulch. Then Karen happened. Karen Whitlock wasn't elected HOA president. She declared herself acting president after the last guy moved to Florida to live out his remaining years in peace. A week later, we found a letter in our mailboxes typed in all caps and signed in cursive so large it took up a third of the page. Welcome to the new era of Sunset Hills. Standards will be enforced. I laughed, thought it was satire. My neighbor Tony framed his. We all figured Karen would tire herself out, maybe join a yoga class or start a podcast. Instead, she bought a clipboard. It started with her parking her monstrous white SUV, license plate rules, halfway across my driveway one morning. I couldn't get my car out, so I knocked. Karen opened her door in a pastel tracksuit, sipping something green out of a wine glass. No greeting. Just a long blink, then, yes? Hey, sorry, your car's blocking me in. She didn't move. Per HOA regulations, street parking overnight is prohibited. I moved it for your convenience. It's not my convenience if I can't leave. That's not my problem, she said, before smiling in that cold DMV employee way and closing the door. The next day, I received my first fine. Infraction. Unauthorized trash can exposure fine. $75. Turns out, I'd left my bin out 17 minutes past collection. 17 minutes. From there, it snowballed. A passive-aggressive war disguised as paperwork. She fined Tony for using unsanctioned Christmas lights that were too twinkly. She made Jenna from down the block paint over her front door, because barn red is not emotionally compatible with the neighborhood's neutral palette. Then came the notices. Then the threats. But I was her favorite target. Maybe because I rolled my eyes at her. Maybe because I called her Clipboard Karen once within earshot. But I became her project. And Karen? Karen loves projects. Next came the lawn measurement. I kid you not. She used a ruler to prove my grass was a half-inch taller than HOA. Limits. Then a certified letter stating my bird feeder violated avifaunal overpopulation guidelines. The fines totaled $425 in under 2 weeks. I appealed. She scheduled the hearing for 7:30 a.m. on a Monday and held it in her kitchen. I sat across from her, and 3 of her friends who looked like they just stepped off a Pilates mat and into a tribunal. They denied the appeal unanimously. You have a choice, Karen said sweetly as she handed me a branded Sunset Hills tote bag. Comply or consider relocating to a more lax neighborhood. Maybe somewhere with, she lowered her voice, chain link fences. That night I stood in my driveway staring at her SUV once again blocking the exit. And I realized something. Karen didn't just want power. She wanted obedience. She needed people to submit to her. And she would push harder each time someone refused. This wasn't just about rules, it was about control. I wasn't going to give it to her. So I filed for a security perimeter landscaping modification permit. Buried in the HOA rules Karen loved so much was a loophole. Defensive installations were allowed if approved by the HOA Security Subcommittee. Karen had disbanded that subcommittee, meaning the authority defaulted to me. One weekend, with rented equipment and a little help from YouTube, I dug a 4-foot trench along the entire curve of my driveway, clean, precise, legal. Then I built a narrow drawbridge using reclaimed wood and a winch system that could lift it into the air like a medieval castle gate. I called it the Karen Keep. Monday morning, I lowered the drawbridge with the elegance of a Bond villain. Karen stood on her porch, bathrobe flapping in the wind, frozen like she'd seen a ghost. By noon, I got another letter. Infraction, unauthorized fortification, fine, 150 plus mandatory inspection, but the inspection required 72 hours notice. I had 3 days to prepare, so I did. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, even dash cam footage of Karen scraping my mailbox with her SUV and driving off. I went through the HOA bylaws line by line. I met with neighbors, quiet, ones who'd been fined into submission. And one by one, they started opening up. Turns out Karen had been weaponizing the rules for years. Selective enforcement, losing appeal forms, even forging a few committee votes. No one had dared challenge her because she made every little infraction feel like a court summons. But with the Karen keep in place, I had declared open war. The night before her scheduled inspection, I saw Karen out by my driveway, flashlight in hand, muttering to herself. I stayed quiet. She examined the trench, the bridge, even tapped a few boards with her clipboard like a deranged inspector general. Then she reached into her jacket, pulled out something, and began tampering with the winch. I grabbed my phone and hit record. The next morning, my drawbridge wouldn't budge. I checked the ropes. Cut. The control lever jammed with glue. Karen had sabotaged it, which meant I finally had her. But I had to be smart. A direct confrontation would give her what she wanted. Drama, a stage, a new excuse to paint me as unstable. No. This had to be surgical. I smiled, turned off my phone, and made a call to a friend. Someone Karen had no idea was living in the neighborhood, and someone with a serious axe to grind. Her name was Melanie Tran, a soft-spoken woman who lived 4 houses down, in a stucco rancher with navy shutters and a suspiciously pristine lawn. She was the kind of neighbor you only saw in passing. Head nods, polite waves. I'd never thought twice about her until Tony mentioned that Karen once tried to have her mailbox condemned. Too modern, she claimed. Turns out, Melanie used to be a paralegal. Worked in property law. Quietly took an early retirement when a certain HOA president made her life miserable for repainting her shutters the wrong shade of blue. She never forgot. When I showed her the footage of Karen sabotaging the drawbridge, Melanie didn't blink. She just asked me to forward it. Then she opened a drawer in her home office and pulled out a manila folder already labeled K. Whitlock. Pattern of abuse. I nearly wept. I've been waiting, she said, smoothing the papers inside. You're not the first, but maybe finally you'll be the last. And so began the counteroffensive. But Karen wasn't slowing down. No, she doubled down. The day after the sabotage, I received a certified letter, hand-delivered by her 14-year-old son, who looked deeply embarrassed to be involved. You have been found in contempt of neighborhood harmony. She included a printed photo of my drawbridge in the upright position, complete with a dramatic red circle drawn around it. Structural aggression, she labeled it. Then she issued a special session notice for the entire HOA to convene in her backyard. Mandatory, it said in bold, for all residents in potential violation of the safety and aesthetic clause. Melanie, Tony, Jenna, we all got one. That Thursday, at precisely 6:00 p.m., the backyard of the Whitlock residence was transformed into what can only be described as a suburban star chamber. Folding chairs in a semicircle, a podium, a printed banner that read, Order, Unity, Excellence. Karen stood at the front in a navy blue blazer, holding her clipboard like it was the 10 Commandments. She wore a headset microphone. Let's begin, she said, without preamble. We are gathered today to address an ongoing threat to our community's integrity. She clicked a remote. A PowerPoint appeared on a portable projector. First, slide. Encroaching Anarchy, a case study in neighborhood decline. The second slide was my driveway. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I don't think a bridge qualifies as anarchy, I said. Karen raised a hand, silencing me, like a judge in court. You will have your time to speak, after the public comment period. Public comment period? Tony tried to laugh. Is this real? Karen turned her laser pointer on him. Tony, I will remind you that your patio umbrella exceeds shade ordinance by 7 square feet. I'd be cautious, Melanie whispered. She's unraveling. I wasn't so sure. The woman had the terrifying charisma of a cult leader and a filing cabinet full of petty citations, and she was rallying people. For the next 20 minutes, she called up neighbors one by one to share their concerns. Most were clearly coerced. A few muttered half-hearted statements about wanting peace or not liking all the construction noise. But one man, a new resident named Glenn, stood up and said, "Honestly, I think the bridge is kind of awesome." Karen didn't write anything down for him, just gave a tight-lipped smile that said, "You won't be awesome for long." Then it was my turn. I stood at the front, looking out at the faces of my neighbors, people who were tired, confused, scared to cross the woman with the clipboard. "I'm not going to argue that the bridge is unconventional," I began. "But it's safe, it's legal, and frankly, it's necessary." Karen scoffed into her mic. "Necessary," I repeated, "because my property keeps getting targeted, sabotaged. My car was keyed, my mailbox was hit, my motion lights were disabled. And just last night," I paused, looking directly at Karen, "someone damaged my bridge, with intent." A ripple went through the crowd. Karen's face didn't move. Impressive, really. She leaned into the mic. "If you're suggesting someone vandalized your little medieval stunt, I suggest you present evidence." I smiled. "Not yet, but I will." That night, she posted an emergency bylaw update to the HOA website. It was backdated. Defensive modifications defined as moats, spikes, bridges, turrets, or hostile flora are prohibited unless first approved by a 5-person review board. There was no 5-person board. She made one up. By Friday, I had 5 new fines, one for excessive slope variance, another for unpermitted noise during bridge lowering activities, even a vague violation labeled existential tension. Existential. Tension. The woman was playing Calvin ball with legalese. I kept my cool, documented everything. Melanie combed through it all, cross-referencing bylaws and previous complaints. We made charts, a timeline, a heat map of her enforcement patterns. And then, Melanie found something. Tucked into a scanned copy of an old HOA charter, dated years before Karen moved in, was a clause she missed on her first pass. Any board decision found to be in violation of the Neighborhood Covenant Charter's fairness. Clause, Article 8, Section B, may be rendered null and void upon presentation of 3 or more conflicting precedents as verified by any neutral arbiter in good standing. 3 precedents. We had 14. But who could serve as a neutral arbiter? Karen had alienated almost everyone. The HOA board was just her and her 2 Pilates friends. Anyone who questioned her got slapped with a fine or buried in paperwork. We needed someone she couldn't touch, someone unimpeachable. That's when Tony said, "What about her husband?" We all went silent. Harold Whitlock, an ex-accountant with a permanent shrug and a 1,000-yard stare, always mowing the lawn, always wearing socks with sandals, never said more than 3 words at a time. Karen never let him speak at meetings, but he was technically still listed as a board member, technically, in good standing. Tony leaned in. What if Harold's not as beaten down as he looks? The idea hung in the air. Could the key to toppling the clipboard queen be hiding behind mirrored sunglasses and khaki cargo shorts? I decided to find out. Waited until Saturday morning, when Karen left for her neighborhood beautification patrol. Then I crossed the street with 2 iced coffees and knocked. Harold opened the door. He blinked, looked at the coffee, then at me. "Hey, Harold," I said. "Can we talk?" His eyes flicked toward Karen's parked SUV. He stepped aside. And as I walked in, I saw something on the hallway wall that made me stop cold. A framed letter from the County Ethics Board, addressed to Karen Whitlock, marked confidential. I turned slowly. Harold sipped his coffee, met my eyes, and then he smiled. Not a full smile, not teeth, just a tiny, knowing tug at the corners of Harold Whitlock's mouth. The kind of smile a man wears when he's been waiting a long time for someone to ask. The right question. I pointed to the letter. "That what I think it is?" He nodded, slow and deliberate, like a weathered monk handing down sacred knowledge. "You kept it framed?" His gaze drifted to the coffee I'd brought. "Vanilla?" he asked. "Hazelnut?" He took a long sip, then walked over to the letter and adjusted it half an inch on the wall. "Karen doesn't know I kept it. Thought I shredded it." "Why didn't you?" Harold's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because someday, I knew. Someone would show up with iced coffee and a plan." I blinked. "Wait, seriously?" "No," he said. "I just hate being underestimated." He led me to his den, dark-paneled, strangely cozy, decorated like a cross between a hunting lodge and a spreadsheet, bookshelves of tax codes, a mounted bass, a framed photo of him shaking hands with someone at a CPA conference. Turns out Harold Whitlock had once been an auditor for the county ethics board. 23 years, sharp as a tack, emotionally invisible. The perfect counterbalance to Karen's explosive performative authority. But he'd retired early, quietly, right after Karen ran for HOA president. I asked him why. "She told me she needed a legacy," he said, eyes fixed on a dusty abacus. "Said we were invisible in this neighborhood. Said she was going to make a mark." "She made a crater." Harold cracked another near smile. "Yeah, that sounds about right." When I told him about the clause in the HOA charter, the one that let a neutral arbiter override her rulings if presented with enough precedent, he didn't even blink. "I remember the clause," he said. "Wrote it myself." "You wrote it?" Harold nodded. Sunset Hills was supposed to be fair, balanced. That clause was insurance, just in case someone ever turned the HOA into a private monarchy. I stared at him. "You mean, like your wife?" "Exactly like my wife." Now, the hard part. Would he be the arbiter? There was a long pause. I could feel him weighing something heavy. Loyalty? Fear? The soul-crushing memory of being publicly corrected about how to load a dishwasher? Finally, he said, "Get me the precedents. I'll do it." We shook hands like two old spies. Melanie nearly choked on her tea when I told her. We spent the next 3 days compiling everything. Full documentation of Karen's arbitrary fines, her fake subcommittees, her backdated rules, even the bridge sabotage. We had testimonies from 8 neighbors. Photos, screenshots, video. Her voice on a hot mic during a Zoom HOA meeting saying, "Technically, I am the law here." By Thursday, the dossier was 2 inches thick. We called it the Whitlock Protocol. We scheduled the neutral arbitration meeting for Saturday. Per HOA rules, it had to be open to all residents. Karen didn't know Harold was the arbiter yet. The invitation simply said, "Dispute hearing per Charter Article 8, Section B, arbitration proceedings." Very official, very boring. Exactly. The kind of wording Karen herself would have used. We held it in Tony's garage, folding chairs, donuts, coffee. Melanie brought a laptop for screen sharing. I set up a projector. At 9:57 a.m., Karen arrived. She entered like Caesar crossing the Rubicon, flanked by her 2 Pilates enforcers, wearing her HOA badge and an icy smile, clipboard in hand, matching navy heels. "What is this?" she said, scanning. The room like it offended her. "Arbitration hearing," I said casually. "Article 8. You can't just call an HOA hearing without board approval." I gestured to Harold, seated in a folding chair beside the screen. She froze. He looked up at her, pleasantly neutral. "I'm the arbiter." Her smile slipped. "You haven't participated in HOA matters in years." "Still in good standing," he replied. "And you're using the charter I helped write. Remember?" Karen took one sharp breath through her nose. "Fine. Proceed. This should be fun." The first half went as expected. Melanie presented the dossier. I read the violation list. We played clips of Karen threatening neighbors, redefining rules, and in one video screaming at a recycling bin for blocking the aesthetic flow of the cul-de-sac. She didn't flinch. She just sat back, cool as marble, pen tapping her clipboard. She'd survived worse. She had excuses for everything. Then came the final exhibit, the Drawbridge sabotage. We played the footage, her cutting the winch cords, glancing over her shoulder, then smearing glue into the gear lever with surgical focus. Silence. Karen stood. That could be anyone. Tony coughed. You're wearing a Karen's the Boss hoodie. It's circumstantial! Harold raised his hand. Enough! I've heard sufficient evidence. Karen laughed. You think you can override me? You? You think any of this is binding? This isn't a courtroom? It's a garage full of bitter... Nobody's in folding chairs? Harold looked her dead in the eye. Karen, I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to save the neighborhood from you. She blinked, for the first time, just a flicker of real panic. Harold turned to the room. I will render my decision in 24 hours. Karen stormed out, fuming. She didn't even take her clipboard, but I knew better than to celebrate. That wasn't defeat. That was a storm warning. And sure enough, by Sunday morning, she struck back. Every mailbox in the neighborhood had a fresh notice stuffed inside. Emergency Ordinance 47C. Immediate. Enactmental non-traditional architectural modifications are to be removed within 48 hours or face daily fines. There was a note handwritten. At the bottom of mine, this is not over. I will bury you in bureaucracy. K. I stepped outside just in time to see a U-Haul pulling up in front of Glenn's house. He was moving out. Said his family couldn't take the insane HOA energy anymore. 2 other families were considering their options. Karen was detonating the neighborhood rather than lose control of it. I called Melanie, furious. We need to move faster, but she was already 1 step ahead. I think I found something. What now? Something she buried. A document she hid. What kind of document? Melanie lowered her voice. The original HOA filing, the incorporation paperwork. She amended it last year and signed a legal declaration under penalty of perjury. So? So she lied. On a state document. My pulse kicked up. You're sure? I'm looking at the original. And Jack, she never dissolved the security subcommittee. My heart stopped, which meant Karen had knowingly invalidated her own ordinance against defensive modifications, which meant my drawbridge wasn't just legal, it was protected. I grinned. This is it. No, Melanie said. This is leverage. And right then, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Jack Mercer? A woman's voice asked. Yeah? This is Angela Cardoza, investigator with the County Code Compliance Office. I froze. We've received multiple complaints about a trench surrounding a residential driveway, and we've been told you've engaged in retaliatory construction. My mouth went dry. I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can, she said, especially when you find out who submitted the complaints. There was a pause. It wasn't Karen, she said. It wasn't. No, it was someone much closer. My stomach dropped. Closer than Karen? The investigator, Angela Cardoza, sighed. The complaint was filed by Harold Whitlock. For a full second, the world tilted. Wait, Harold? Harold? Filed under his name. Full signature, notarized. 2 days ago. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there in my driveway, staring at the unmoving drawbridge like it was mocking me. Harold had been the plan, the final piece, the inside man, and he'd turned, or had he? I marched across the street and knocked. No answer. The house was dark, curtains drawn, lights off. Harold's sedan was gone. I called Melanie. No way, she said. There's no way Harold would do that. Angela said it was notarized. Then it wasn't him, she said. We need to find him. Tony texted that he saw Harold leaving town earlier that day with a duffel bag and what looked like a fishing pole. He hadn't said goodbye. That afternoon, an official county notice was taped to my front door. Pending. Investigation. Do not alter or obstruct area of construction. Karen didn't even try to hide it anymore. She strutted past my house around dusk, wine glass in one hand, phone in the other. Have you heard the good news? She called out cheerfully. Your little trench might be a code violation. But hey, at least it's rustic. I kept my face neutral. Inside, I was on fire. The arbitration ruling from Harold was now tainted. If he filed a complaint against me, even a false one, It gave Karen the leverage she needed to discredit the entire process, which meant we needed a new plan, and fast. Melanie and I met in her garage that night. We reviewed every file, every timestamp, every document Harold had touched. That's when we found it. A digital signature. Harold's arbitration ruling had been submitted electronically from an IP address registered to the Sunset Hills HOA. Time-stamped after the complaint. Was filed against me. We stared at the screen. She forged it, Melanie said. Karen forged the complaint under Harold's name, then used it to undermine his ruling, which makes the ruling invalid, unless we prove the forgery first. And that's when Melanie smiled. She used the HOA portal to file it. That system logs IP addresses. It took one polite request to the portal vendor and 3 hours of waiting. At 2:14 a.m., we got the email. Login activity confirmed. Complaint submitted via HOA portal from administrator account K to Whitlock. She'd slipped. Karen had filed the complaint as Harold, using her own admin account. The next day, we called an emergency HOA-wide meeting. We posted flyers, emails, even had Tony walking the neighborhood with a megaphone. Come for donuts. And the downfall of a tyrant. Saturday morning, the cul-de-sac buzzed. The entire neighborhood turned out. Everyone smelled blood in the HOA water. Karen arrived fashionably late, wearing a white blazer like she was headed to a deposition and a wedding at the same time. She made her way to the front and adjusted the mic. Let's begin. I'll take it from here, I said, stepping up beside her. This is a fraud hearing. Gasps. Karen's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Melanie wheeled over a projector and clicked. The screen behind us lit up with the login timestamp, the IP address, and the admin credentials K. Whitlock. This is the account that filed the complaint against me, under Harold's name, from your HOA portal login, while Harold was already out of town. Karen scoffed. Anyone could have used my laptop. Melanie hit play on the next slide. Footage from Karen's Ring camera. It showed her, wine glass in one hand, typing furiously at her patio table. Same day, same hour. Right before the complaint was filed. She froze. I took a breath. You submitted a legal document under someone else's name, then used that fake document to discredit an arbitration ruling, rendering it invalid. That's fraud. State level. No, Karen said quickly. Look, you're twisting this. Harold's voice cut through the air. No, they're not. Karen whipped around. There he was, cargo shorts, fishing hat, calm fury radiating from him. I never filed that complaint, he said, and I'm filing a real one, with the county clerk. The crowd erupted. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her Pilates friends slipped quietly into the back row. Glenn's wife shouted, "You monster!" Someone else started a slow clap that caught fire. Karen turned to me. Her voice cracked. This is a witch hunt. I leaned in. You started the fire. Within the hour, the board voted to remove her as HOA president. A special election was called. An emergency audit of HOA funds was approved. Karen's laptop was taken for investigation. She stormed off. No clipboard, no entourage, no power. The bridge stayed, the moat stayed, everything stayed, and slowly the neighborhood came alive again. Mailboxes got painted wild colors. Front lawns grew a little longer. Tony installed a disco ball in his backyard for reasons. The HOA was renamed Sunset Hills Neighborhood Council. No fines, no forced compliance. Just neighbors helping neighbors. Melanie was elected as the new chairperson. Harold joined the audit committee. Jenna started a Facebook group called No More Clipboards that somehow gained 300 followers in under a week. And me? Well, I became a bit of a local legend. People brought me beer. Someone left a thank you card in my mailbox that read simply, "Thanks for the Drawbridge." But the best part? A month later, I received a letter from the County Code Compliance Office. Complaint. Case closed. No violations found. At the bottom, a handwritten note from Angela Cardoza. Nice trench. Karen? Last I heard, she moved to a gated community with a stricter HOA. Rumor has it she tried to run for president again. They made her chair of the dog waste committee. Poetic justice, really. Because in the end, it wasn't about a trench or a bridge, or even the fines. It was about standing your ground, and if you're going to dig in, make it deep.